You had the thought, and you did not say it. Not because it was illegal. Nothing about that thought is illegal where you live. You did not say it because you ran the arithmetic in about half a second. The screenshot, the group chat, the one colleague who would repeat it slightly wrong to the one person who matters, the particular way a room goes quiet. So you said the smoother thing instead, and you felt that small private disgust of someone who has just paid a tax he never agreed to. Now notice what did not happen. No police officer, no court, no parliament passed anything. Nobody could be named. The thing that closed your mouth had no address you could write to, no procedure you could appeal, and no moment where it announced itself. It was other people doing what other people do, and you obeying, in advance, a rule that was never written down. In 1859, a small book appeared in London that had been written to explain exactly this. Its author had no internet, no platforms, and no pylons. What he had was the same machine running at a slower speed, and enough distance from it to see the shape of the thing. He gave it a name so successful that people now forget somebody had to invent it. The tyranny of the majority. And then he did the harder part. He tried to work out the single rule that could hold it back. One sentence, one limit, applied to everything. This is the book that has been argued about ever since, usually by people quoting half of it. The book is On Liberty, published in 1859, and the man who wrote it had been engineered from birth to write something like it. John Stuart Mill was raised as an experiment. His father taught him Greek at 3, Latin at 8, and political economy before most children finish learning to swim. There were no holidays and almost no other children. At 20, the experiment cracked. Mill fell into a depression so complete that he sat down one day and asked himself whether, if every reform he had been trained to want came true tomorrow, he would be happy, and knew immediately that the answer was no. He came out the other side a different kind of thinker, still a reformer, but permanently suspicious of any system that runs a human being the way his father had run him. Then there is the other author. Harriet Taylor was his friend for 20 years while she was married to another man, and his wife for 7 after that. Mill's own dedication calls her the inspirer, and in part the author, of all that is best in his writings. She died in Avignon in 1858. On Liberty appeared the following year, and he never revised a word of it. He said he could not improve what they had made together. He would later sit in Parliament and become the first member of the House of Commons to stand up and demand the vote for women. The book is short, about 150 pages, and underneath the Victorian courtesy, it is very angry. Here is the whole book in one sentence, and then we will spend 20 minutes earning it. Mill says there is exactly one reason that justifies overruling an adult against their will, and that reason is preventing harm to other people. Not their own good, not their own health, not their own soul, and above all, not the fact that everyone else finds them distasteful. That is it. That is the famous harm principle, and it sounds so obvious in the 21st century that it is easy to miss how much it costs. It costs you the pleasure of correcting strangers. It protects the people you find hardest to protect. And notice the second half of Mill's argument, which is the part usually skipped. He is not mainly worried about governments. Governments are visible. You can vote them out, sue them, watch them. Mill's real target is the thing that has no visible machinery at all, the settled opinion of the people around you, enforced by nothing more than disapproval, exclusion, and the slow management of your reputation. He thought that in a democracy this force would grow rather than shrink, because the majority would stop feeling like a faction and start feeling like reality itself. So the book has two halves that people keep splitting apart. One rule to limit power, and a warning about which power actually runs your life. First beat: the tyranny that needs no police. Mill begins by pointing out that the old story about liberty is out of date. For centuries, liberty meant protection from a ruler. You had a king with interests opposed to yours, and freedom was whatever you could fence off from him. Then the ruler started to be elected, and people assumed the problem was solved. If we govern ourselves, who is left to oppress us? The answer is us, because self-government in practice means the government of each by all the rest, and the will of the people means, in the end, the will of the most numerous or most active part of the people. Then comes the sentence that is the real engine of the book. Mill says that when society issues wrong mandates, or any mandates at all in matters that are none of its business, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since, though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself. Read the end of that again: enslaving the soul itself. His claim is that political tyranny reaches your body and your property, and you can hate it privately the whole time. Social tyranny gets inside and edits what you are willing to think where nobody is watching. It does not need prisons. It needs only that you be able to imagine what they would say. Nobody has to ban an opinion if the price of holding it is your friendships and your job. Second beat: the one rule. Having named the danger, Mill states the limit, and he states it as flatly as a clause in a contract. The sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number, is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. And then the line that gets quoted on posters, though rarely with what follows it: over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. Now watch how much he throws away with that. A person's own good, Mill says, is not a sufficient warrant. You may reason with him, persuade him, plead with him. You may not compel him because it would be better for him, or make him happier, or because in the opinion of others it would be wiser or even right. Every paternalism you have ever felt the pull of dies in that sentence, including the kind you feel about people you love. And Mill knew exactly how much weight the word harm was being asked to carry. He is not selling a world without rules. He is drawing a border and insisting that everything on the far side of it, the whole vast territory of things that merely offend, disgust, or embarrass other people, is off limits to force. The argument for the rest of the book is that we will be repaid for that restraint, and repaid with interest. Third beat: mankind -1. Mill now takes the hardest case he can find and refuses to soften it. Suppose an opinion is not merely unpopular, but universally rejected. One person against everyone alive. If all mankind -1 were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. And his reason is not the one you expect. He does not say the silenced person has a right to speak. He says the rest of us are the ones being robbed. The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion, still more than those who hold it. Look at the accounting. If the suppressed opinion is right, you have just traded away your one chance to swap error for truth. If it is wrong, you have lost something Mill thinks is almost as valuable: the clearer, livelier grasp of the truth that only comes from having it attacked. Either way, the loss is yours, and it compounds, because you have also taken it from everyone who comes after you. And before anyone accuses him of naivety, Mill puts the limit in the same chapter, in plain words. Opinions lose their immunity, he says, when the circumstances of their expression make them a positive instigation to a mischievous act. Printing that corn dealers starve the poor is protected. Shouting it to an angry crowd already standing outside a particular corn dealer's house is not. The line is not the content. The line is whether you are arguing or lighting a fuse. Fourth beat, the dead dogma. Here is the part that unsettles people who thought they agreed with this book. Mill says that suppressing a false opinion does not merely wrong the person suppressed, it rots the true opinion left standing. A truth that is never fully, frequently, and fearlessly discussed stops being a living truth and becomes a dead dogma, a form of words that people assent to without knowing the grounds of it and could not defend against the most superficial objection. They hold it the way you hold a password, correctly and without meaning. He then sets the standard that has aged the best of anything in the book. He points at Cicero, who studied his opponent's case with as much intensity as his own, and says, "This is not a courtroom trick, but the only method available to anyone who wants to arrive at the truth." Then, 7 words that ought to be printed on the inside of every skull. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. Not knows less, knows little of that, including his own. If you cannot state the strongest version of the argument against you, you do not know why you believe what you believe. You have only ever heard your own side's summary of the other, which is not an argument, but a rumor. Mill's demand is uncomfortable in a way that no algorithm has made easier. You have to go and find the best people who disagree with you, not the worst, because the worst are always available, and they teach you nothing. Fifth beat, experiments of living. Chapter 3 turns from what you may say to what you may be, and Mill argues that the same reasoning applies. As it is useful, while mankind are imperfect, that there should be different opinions, so it is useful that there should be different experiments of living, different ways of arranging a life tried out in practice by anyone who thinks them worth trying, and limited only by injury to others. His enemy in this chapter is not the state and not even hostility. It is custom, which never has to argue because it never has to notice itself. And he makes the cost personal. He who lets the world, or his own portion of it, choose his plan of life for him has no need of any other faculty than the ape-like one of imitation. Note the phrase, his own portion of it. Mill is not describing a peasant obeying a lord. He is describing you, obeying the couple of hundred people whose opinion you actually track. The person who chooses for himself, by contrast, has to use everything he has: observation to see, reasoning and judgment to foresee, activity to gather what he needs to decide, discrimination to decide, and firmness to hold to the decision afterwards. Those are muscles, and Mill's point is that they atrophy exactly like muscles. A life lived entirely by imitation does not merely turn out wrong. It leaves you without the capacity to have chosen otherwise. So what does all of it add up to? Put the machine together. One rule: harm to others and nothing else. A warning that the dangerous power in a democracy wears no uniform. An argument that free discussion is not a courtesy extended to cranks, but the maintenance schedule for your own mind. And a defense of the strange, the eccentric, and the inconvenient on the grounds that a society which files them down has no way left of finding out that it is wrong. That is the case, and it is still the case people reach for, usually without knowing whose it was. Now, the part that a faithful reading does not get to skip. In the same first chapter where Mill draws his border, he cuts a hole in it. Despotism, he writes, is a legitimate mode of government in dealing with barbarians, provided the end be their improvement. And by barbarians, he means most of the people alive at the time. The man who wrote that spent 35 years working for the East India Company, which administered a subcontinent. So the book that most eloquently defends your right to be left alone also hands the argument for leaving people alone to a committee and tells much of the world to wait. That is not a footnote, and it is not a slip of the pen. It is the shape of the age wearing the face of the argument. Take the principle. Notice who its author was willing to exclude from it. Both of those are the book. Here is the one thing to do with this book today, and it takes about 90 seconds. Pick the opinion you currently find most stupid. Not the caricature version, the one an actual person you know actually holds. Now write down the strongest case for it. Not a fair-sounding summary, the version its best defender would recognize as his own, with the strongest evidence and the most sympathetic motive attached. If you cannot get past 2 sentences, that is the finding. It does not mean you are wrong. It means, in Mill's sense, that you do not yet hold your opinion. It holds you, and you would be unable to tell the difference between believing something and having been issued it. Do it in writing, because the version in your head is always more generous than the version you can actually produce. And there is a second half, which is harder and matters more. The next time you are the room, the group chat, the meeting, the comment thread where everyone already agrees, notice the half-second in which somebody decides not to say the thing. That silence is the tyranny Mill was describing, and on that occasion, you are not its victim. You are the one supplying it. You cannot vote it out. You can only stop being a unit of it, one conversation at a time. John Stuart Mill died in Avignon in 1873, in the town where Harriet Taylor was buried and was buried beside her. On Liberty was the book he refused to revise. It has been used ever since by nearly everyone, in every direction, which is what happens to a principle clear enough to be inconvenient to its own supporters. If you take one thing from these 20 minutes, take this. The force most likely to decide what you say this week does not wear a uniform, does not need a law, and does not know it is doing anything at all. It is just the people around you and your own accurate prediction of them. Mill's answer was not to smash it. It was to insist on a border, and then to spend the rest of his argument explaining why the strange and the wrong and the badly dressed have to be allowed inside it, because that is where the corrections come from. Next time on 20-Minute Classics, another classic that argues with this one. If this was worth 20 minutes, subscribe. A new book every week, read faithfully. And tell me in the comments what you did not say this week, and who you imagined saying it to.